This narrative is titled, My Mom Cheated with My Best Friend, Tried to Come Back, and My Fiancé Helped Her, so I called off the engagement. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's video, I need a favor. We've noticed the channel's growth slowing down, and subscribing is one of the most effective ways to support us. It's quick, free, and helps us continue creating great content. Your support means everything to us, so let's keep growing together. Thank you so much. Now, let's jump into the video. Hey guys, so here's the situation. My life kind of fell apart, and I never imagined I'd be the one sharing a story like this. But maybe opening up will help me make sense of it all. This is the story of how my family fell apart and how I lost two people I thought would always be there for me. Growing up, my family seemed pretty typical. My dad, Tom, 51, was one of those quiet, reliable men. He worked long hours to provide for us without complaining. My mom, Lisa, 46, was the social one. She was always talking to neighbors, arranging family meals, and acting like the glue that held everything together. Then there was Zach. Zach wasn't just my best friend. He was like a brother. We'd known each other since middle school, bonded over video games and bad jokes, and stuck together through everything. Zach was the guy I'd call at 2 a.m. if I needed anything. No questions asked. My parents loved him too. He was over so much growing up that my mom would joke about charging him rent. But looking back now, I can see things that didn't seem right at the time but are clear now. Like pieces of a puzzle I didn't realize needed connecting. For instance, Lisa and Zach were always joking around. I thought it was just because he was around so often, but there were moments that felt off. She'd laugh too hard at his jokes or say things like, "Zach's such a sweet boy," in a way that seemed a little over the top. I even remember a time when Zach joked about never getting married because Lisa set the bar too high. Everyone laughed it off, and I didn't think much of it because, well, why would I? There were other small things, too. Sometimes Zach would show up when I wasn't home, claiming he was just checking on something or dropping something off. Lisa never mentioned it, and I assumed it wasn't anything to worry about. He was like family, so it didn't seem odd that he'd be comfortable around my parents even when I wasn't there. But then it got strange. Zach started coming over just to hang out with Mom, telling jokes and chatting. When I asked him to hang out like we always did, he'd start suggesting we just stay at my place or saying my house was better than going out. It wasn't like him at all. Zach was always the first to suggest going to the arcade or grabbing burgers, but now he just wanted to stay in. I began suggesting we meet somewhere else, like the park or my favorite diner, and he'd reluctantly agree, but something felt off. He wasn't the same Zach I grew up with. He'd get distracted during our hangouts, constantly checking his phone, and the easy flow of conversation we used to have wasn't there anymore. Then there was Lisa. She'd been acting a bit different for a while, but I brushed it off as normal life stuff. She started dressing up more than usual without any special occasion or spending extra time texting, which she claimed was just talking to Aunt Karen or someone else. My dad noticed too. He'd comment on how distracted Lisa had been lately, but he didn't seem to think much of it. The weirdest part, though, was how my dad started acting. He's not the type to show a lot of emotion, but suddenly he was snapping at small things. If the remote was out of place, he'd grumble. If dinner was late, he'd sigh like the world was ending. He always looked tired, like he wasn't sleeping. I thought maybe it was work stress. He's always been a hard worker, never taking a day off. I even suggested he take a weekend off, go fishing or something, and he just said, "I've got too much on my plate right now." I didn't push it. My dad's always been the kind of guy who keeps his issues to himself, so I figured he'd work through it like he always did. But this time, something felt different. There was this one night I'll never forget. My dad was sitting in the living room, staring at the TV without really watching it. I asked him if he was okay, and he just shook his head and said, "I'm fine, kiddo. Don't worry about me." His voice cracked a bit when he said it, but I didn't press him. I should have. Around the same time, Zach started pulling away too. He wasn't around as much, and when we did hang out, he seemed distracted. When I asked him what was going on, he'd just shrug and say, "You know, life stuff," It was odd because Zach had always been carefree. But when you trust someone completely, you don't think much of it. Zach was my best friend, Lisa was my mom, and my dad was my rock. I never suspected anything was wrong between them. Then one day, my dad came home from work looking completely exhausted. He barely said a word during dinner, which was unlike him. Later that night, I overheard my parents arguing. It wasn't loud, but I could hear the tension in their voices. My dad said something like, "I know what's going on, Lisa, don't lie to me." I didn't hear her response, but I froze. That was when I realized something big was happening. I couldn't pinpoint it, but it felt like the foundation of everything I thought I knew was cracking. I couldn't sleep that night. My mind kept spiraling, replaying every little detail. The way my mom had been acting, the subtle changes in my dad, and if I had missed something obvious. Their argument didn't feel like a small disagreement. It felt deeper, like something was wrong. I tried convincing myself I was overthinking it, maybe just a rough patch or misunderstanding. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. The next morning, my dad sat me down. I could tell right away that this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. He looked defeated, like he was carrying a huge burden, and it was finally too much. He sighed deeply and said, "I need to tell you something, kiddo. You're not going to like it, but you deserve to know." At first, I thought maybe someone had passed away. The way he was struggling to speak made it feel that heavy. But what he said hit me harder than anything I could have imagined. "It's your mom," he started. His voice cracked, and he had to pause before continuing. "She's been having an affair with Zach." I felt like my mind just short-circuited. I couldn't process what he was saying. I actually laughed, but when I saw the look on my dad's face, I just stared at him, waiting for him to tell me it was a joke or that I had misunderstood. But he wasn't joking. "Zach!" I managed to whisper. "Zach! My best friend Zach?" My dad just nodded, and I could see the pain in his eyes. This wasn't just about Lisa and Zach betraying me. They'd betrayed him too. He told me how he found out. It started with small things. A strange text on Lisa's phone that she dismissed as a wrong number. Times when she said she was running errands but was gone far longer than usual. He didn't want to believe it, but something felt off. Then one day he came home early and saw Zach's car parked outside. "I knew something was wrong the moment I saw it," he said. "I went inside, and there they were, acting like teenagers, sneaking around." I couldn't even breathe. The image of it alone made my stomach turn. Zach wasn't just my best friend. He was like a son to my parents. And my mom, she was supposed to be the one person I could trust completely. "What did you do?" I asked. "I told them both to get the hell out of my house," he said. "Your mom tried to make excuses, but there was nothing she could say to make it better." By now, my dad was tearing up. I had only seen him cry once before, when his father passed away. Seeing him like this shattered something inside me. After he told me, I felt like I was in a fog. I didn't know what to say or do. I just sat there, numb, as my dad kept talking. He told me that Lisa had been begging for his forgiveness, but he couldn't even look at her. "You don't do that to family," he said, his voice shaking. "You just don't." When I finally found my voice, I asked him why he hadn't told me sooner when he first noticed the signs. He said he didn't want to ruin my relationship with my mom. He had to, but it was important for you to know, he said. "I couldn't keep this from you anymore." The anger didn't hit me immediately. At first, it was just disbelief, shock, and this empty feeling in my chest. I couldn't grasp it. Lisa and Zach, how was that even possible? I told my dad I needed to speak with her. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I couldn't stay there. When I confronted Lisa, it felt like I was facing a stranger. The woman in front of me wasn't the mom I grew up with. She was someone I didn't even recognize. She immediately started crying, covering her face, repeatedly saying it was a mistake, that she didn't know what happened to her, that she never meant to hurt anyone. I just stood there, staring at her in disbelief. "A mistake," I said, my voice rising. "Are you serious? What the hell is wrong with you, Mom? He's half your age. He should be like a son to you." "You ruined this family for what? For Zach?" I asked. She didn't respond, just kept sobbing as if she was the victim. It made my blood boil. You didn't mean to hurt anyone. Are you kidding me? You destroyed this family, wrecked Dad, and betrayed me? Do you even get that? Or are you too busy crying for yourself to care? Her sobs grew louder, but I was done. You're unbelievable, I spat. You're not my mom anymore. I don't even know who you are. I walked out before she could say another word. I didn't trust myself to stay and not say something I'd regret. But I wasn't finished. Zach still needed to hear from me, and I wasn't going to let him off the hook with just a text. I drove straight to his apartment, and the entire way there, I could feel the anger building inside me like a volcano ready to erupt. I wasn't sure what I'd do when I got there, but I knew one thing. I wasn't leaving until he knew exactly how I felt. When I reached his place, I slammed on the door so hard that it almost came off its hinges. Zach opened it, looking startled, like he wasn't expecting me. "Oh, hey, buddy," he said. Before he could say more, I grabbed him by the front of his shirt and shoved him against the doorframe. "Don't you hey buddy me," I yelled. "What the hell is wrong with you? You were my best friend, my brother, and you do this with my mom." He stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but I cut him off. "I don't care what you have to say," I snapped. "You don't exist to me anymore. Do you hear me? I don't want to see your face again. If I do, you'll regret it." Zach looked terrified. Good. He deserved every ounce of the anger and betrayal I was feeling. I shoved him one more time before letting go of his shirt. "We're done," I said. "Don't call me, don't text me, don't even think about me. You're dead to me." I turned and walked away before I did something I'd regret. My hands were shaking, my heart was racing, and I felt like I had just been through a battle, but at least now he knew exactly where we stood. The fallout was quick and harsh. My dad filed for divorce almost immediately. He didn't want to drag things out, and honestly, I couldn't blame him. Lisa moved out within weeks, and once she was gone, it felt like a weight had been lifted from the house. Just like that, our small family was torn apart, and I haven't felt at home since. Lisa tried reaching out a few times after that, texts, emails, even a handwritten letter, but I ignored all of it. I couldn't deal with her anymore. Every time I thought about her, it felt like someone was twisting a knife in my chest. Cutting her out of my life was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was necessary. She wasn't just my mom, she was someone I looked up to, someone I thought would always have my back. Losing that felt like losing a piece of myself. As for Zach, I never saw or spoke to him again. I made it clear I wanted nothing to do with him, and thankfully, he respected that. Or maybe he was just too scared to try. Either way, I didn't care. All of that left a deep scar that I thought would never fade. But life doesn't stop for anyone. Time kept moving forward, whether I liked it or not. Eventually, I started trying to rebuild my life. My dad and I settled into a new routine. We weren't exactly best friends, but we had this quiet understanding, like we were both paddling through the same storm. He started picking up hobbies, working on old cars in the garage, and I focused on my job. It was easier to keep busy than think about everything else. That's when I met Ashley. We met at a friend's BBQ about a year after everything with Lisa and Zach. She was funny, smart, and had this way of making everyone feel important. We clicked immediately. She wasn't pushy, didn't try to dig into my past. She just felt real. We started dating, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly happy again. Things were good with Ashley. She was understanding, supportive, and never rushed me through my emotions. Over time, I found myself opening up to her about what had happened with my mom and Zach. She was horrified, of course. "What kind of person does that?" she asked, shaking her head. "You didn't deserve that." Hearing her say that meant more to me than I expected. For so long, I had carried around this feeling that maybe I should have seen it coming or done something differently. Ashley made me feel like I wasn't crazy for being hurt. About 2 years into our relationship, I proposed. It wasn't extravagant, just the two of us on a quiet beach, me with a ring in my pocket and a nervous smile. When she said yes, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was finally leaving the past behind me. But of course, life has a way of reminding you that some things don't stay buried. Not long after the engagement, I got a call from an old mutual friend of Zach's and mine. Someone I hadn't spoken to in ages. At first, I thought it was going to be one of those awkward catch-up calls, but instead he hit me with, "Hey, did you hear what happened to Zach?" I hadn't thought about Zach in a long time, but hearing his name still left a bitter taste in my mouth. "No," I said flatly. "What about him?" "He got arrested," the guy said. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "Arrested for what?" "Robbery," he replied, like it was no big deal. "Apparently, he tried to rob a convenience store with some friends, and the whole thing went sideways. He's looking at serious time." I didn't know how to respond. Honestly, my first instinct was to laugh. Of course, Zach would screw up his life even more. It was almost poetic. The guy who thought he could take whatever he wanted without caring about the consequences was now sitting in a jail cell. Karma had finally caught up with him, and frankly, it felt good. When I hung up, I kept thinking about it. Zach, the guy who'd once been my best friend, was now rotting in jail because of his own stupidity. Did I feel sorry for him? Not for a second. In fact, I felt a sense of justice. This was the same guy who had the audacity to betray me and my family, thinking he'd get away with it. Now he was paying the price. Good. Let him sit there and think about how his choices got him exactly where he deserved to be. But it didn't end there. A few weeks later, I got another surprise. My mom, yes, Lisa, decided to reach out. She sent me a long, rambling email about how Zach had betrayed her trust and how sorry she was for everything that had happened. She said she wanted to make things right with me and my dad, that she'd learned her lesson and realized how much she'd hurt us. I stared at the email for a while, my chest tightening with anger and disbelief. After everything she'd done, now that Zach had crashed and burned, she wanted forgiveness? She wanted to crawl back? I didn't respond. I couldn't. Ashley noticed I was off and asked what was wrong. When I told her about the email, she just shook her head. "She doesn't deserve a second chance," she said. "You've already given her enough." Hearing that from Ashley made me feel more confident in my decision. I didn't owe Lisa anything. She made her choices, and now she had to live with them. But the situation didn't end there. Lisa started trying to contact my dad, too. She even showed up at his house, unannounced one day, crying on the doorstep and begging him to talk to her. He told her to leave and slammed the door in her face. "Some people never change," he told me later. After that, I decided to move on. Zach was out of my life, Lisa was out of my life, and for once, it felt like I was finally in charge of my life with Ashley by my side, and our engagement felt like the start of something new. Everything seemed to be heading in the right direction, or so I believed. Ashley had always been someone who saw the good in people. She believed in second chances, forgiveness, and all of that. While I admired her for her big heart, there were times when her outlook conflicted with my more rigid beliefs, especially concerning my mom. I had made it clear that Lisa had no place in my life, no matter how many emails she sent or how many fake apologies she made, and Ashley seemed to understand this, reassuring me that my actions were justified. One evening, Ashley casually mentioned that we had dinner plans with her coworkers. She described it as a simple get-together, nothing extravagant, just a chance to meet some of the people she worked with. I didn't think much of it. Ashley's friends were always great, and it sounded like a nice break from the usual routine. We arrived at the cozy Italian restaurant a bit early, and Ashley seemed a little more anxious than usual, checking her phone more frequently. I assumed it was work stress and didn't press her. She led me to a table in the back, and when I turned the corner, I froze. There, sitting nervously and forcing a smile, was Lisa. My mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't some casual dinner with coworkers. It was a setup. Ashley had invited my mom. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice sharp enough to cut through the awkward silence. Lisa opened her mouth, but I glared at her, silencing her instantly. Turning to Ashley, who was nervously fidgeting, I asked, "Seriously, Ashley, you thought this was a good idea?" I thought if you spoke to her, maybe you could work things out. After all, she's your mom, and she seems really sorry." She stammered. "She seems sorry?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You have no idea what she did. You have no clue what it was like to have my family destroyed because of her." Lisa tried to speak up, but I pointed at her, cutting her off. "You've done enough damage. You don't get to waltz back into my life just because you're feeling guilty now." People at nearby tables were starting to watch, but I didn't care. I turned back to Ashley, who looked like she was on the verge of tears. "You went behind my back," I said, my voice quieter, but still full of anger. "You had no right to do this." "I was just trying to help," she whispered. "Help?" I repeated, disbelief turning into frustration. "You didn't help, Ashley. You just shattered my trust in you." I threw a few bills on the table to cover whatever had been ordered and walked out. I heard Ashley calling after me, but I didn't stop. My hands were shaking as I got into my car and drove away. Later that night, Ashley came home and tried to explain. She said she had been talking to Lisa for a while and thought that if we just talked, I would see that my mom had changed. "Changed?" I said bitterly, laughing. "You really think someone who tore apart her own family can just change? What did she promise? To be better? To never hurt anyone again?" "She's your mom," Ashley said softly, as though that made it acceptable. Her voice trembled as she tried to soothe me. "Exactly," I snapped. "She was my mom, and she chose to throw that away. You don't get to make that choice for me. Do you even understand why I told you everything about what happened with my family?" Ashley stood there, confused and defensive. "I told you about the betrayal, the pain, the boundaries I had to set because I trusted you. I trusted you to respect what I needed to heal, and what did you do? You crossed the line without even telling me." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't stop. "Why? Why would you do that? What part of my story made you think this was a good idea?" "I thought it was for the best," she said, her voice breaking, "for our future. I thought having a relationship with your mom, your family, would be good for us, especially for when we have kids someday. Don't you think they should know their grandparents?" The mention of kids hit me like a ton of bricks. My jaw clenched. "You think this is how you build a future?" I asked, my voice sharp. "By ignoring my boundaries. By going behind my back to fix things that aren't yours to fix. Do you even hear yourself right now?" Ashley started crying harder, and for a split second, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered Lisa sitting there at the table, smiling nervously like she hadn't destroyed everything I cared about, and my anger flared again. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Ashley sobbed. "I thought I was helping. I thought you'd see that she's sorry, and maybe you could move on." "Move on?" I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "Did you think forgiveness was a switch I could just flip because you wanted a picture-perfect future? You still don't get it," I said, my anger now fully boiling over. "It's not about moving on. It's about respect. You knew what Lisa did to me. You knew how much it hurt, how much it still hurts, and instead of supporting me, you decided you knew better." "I just wanted to help," she repeated, her voice small and pleading. I stared at her, my mind racing. This is the person I'm supposed to marry? The person who thinks it's okay to make huge decisions about my life without even consulting me? The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I can't build a life with someone who doesn't respect me enough to stay out of things I've clearly said are off limits. I lowered my tone, but it was no less firm. "This isn't about Lisa. This is about us. How am I supposed to trust you after this? How am I supposed to believe that you won't do something like this again, thinking it's for the greater good or whatever?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I won't, I promise. I didn't mean to hurt you." "You did," I interrupted, "and that's the problem. You didn't even think about how this would affect me because you were too focused on what you thought was right." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I can't do this," I said, my voice heavy. "I can't spend my life wondering if the next time something feels wrong, you'll go behind my back to fix it." Her sobs grew louder, but I knew there was no coming back from this. Over the next few days, things between us became colder. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was tense and uncomfortable. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I sat Ashley down and told her the wedding was off. She broke down, begging me to reconsider, saying she didn't mean to hurt me. "I was just trying to help," she kept saying, as though that could fix everything. But it didn't. "You didn't trust me enough to let me handle my own life," I told her. "How am I supposed to marry someone who thinks they know what's best for me better than I do?" She cried harder, but I stayed firm. I knew this was the right decision. Breaking off the engagement wasn't easy. I loved Ashley, but love isn't enough when trust is gone. And after everything I had been through with Lisa and Zach, I couldn't ignore that. I wasn't willing to take the risk of being hurt again. A week after Ashley packed her things and moved out, she made one final attempt to change my mind, but I stood my ground. Now I was on my own again. And while it stung, there was also an odd sense of relief. I had cut off another person who thought they could make decisions for me without considering the impact it would have on me. The days that followed weren't easy. Ashley reached out through texts, calls, and even showed up at my place unannounced. Each time, I remained resolute. I wasn't going to let her talk me back into something I knew deep down was wrong. However, one of her texts stuck with me. "You're letting your past ruin your future. This isn't just about Lisa, it's about us." I read it over and over, feeling frustration building in my chest. She still didn't understand. It wasn't about my past. It was about her crossing a line I had clearly set from the beginning. Why do people think they can fix things that aren't theirs to fix? It wasn't her job to repair my relationship with Lisa. It wasn't her place to decide what was best for my future. That was my decision, and she hadn't respected it. My dad was the first person I confided in about calling off the wedding. I expected him to be disappointed or maybe a little upset. He'd always liked Ashley. But his reaction took me by surprise. "Good," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You don't need someone who thinks they know better than you about your own life." I raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to tell me I'm being too harsh?" "Nope," he replied simply. "You've been through enough. You deserve someone who listens to you and respects you, not someone who thinks they're smarter than you about your own pain." He was absolutely right. I didn't need anyone to validate my decision, but hearing it from him made me feel like I wasn't crazy for standing firm. About a week later, Ashley came by one last time. I wasn't surprised, but I wasn't exactly happy to see her either. She stood on my porch, holding a box of things I'd left at her place. "I just wanted to say goodbye," she said, her voice quieter than usual. I nodded and took the box from her. "Thanks." She hesitated, standing there as if trying to find the courage to speak. Finally, she blurted out, "I didn't mean to hurt you, you know." I looked at her, my face expressionless. "I know," I replied flatly, not wanting to argue or drag things out any longer. She fiddled with her hands, her voice barely audible. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought you'd understand someday. Maybe even thank me." Yeah, after everything, she still thought I should thank her. I let her words linger in the air for a moment before responding. "I'm not going to argue with you, Ashley. You made your choice, and I've made mine." She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and walked away without saying another word. It was the end of something I had once believed would last forever, but it was also the beginning of me taking control of my life. After Ashley was gone, I decided to double down on focusing on myself. I threw myself into work and spent more time with my dad. We didn't talk much about what had happened, but just having him around made me feel grounded. Lisa, of course, didn't let up. She sent more emails, called a few times, and even tried showing up at my dad's place again. He turned her away each time, and I blocked her on every platform I could think of. One day, my dad handed me a letter she had left in his mailbox. "Do you want to read it, or should I just toss it?" he asked. I stared at the envelope for a moment, then shook my head. "Burn it," I said. He smiled. "Thought you'd say that." We didn't discuss Lisa much after that. She became like a ghost, something we both knew existed, but chose to ignore. Now, as I'm writing this, I realize that even though Ashley is gone and I've cut Lisa off for good, there's still this emptiness that sits within me. I have my dad, work keeps me busy, and I still spend time with a few close friends, but sometimes it feels like I'm just floating. It's not exactly loneliness, more like I'm unmoored. For so long, my life revolved around fixing the damage Lisa left behind and then planning a future with Ashley. Now, both of those things are gone, and I'm standing here thinking, okay, what's next? One thing is certain, though. I'm done settling. I'm not letting people into my life who think they can fix me or decide what's best for me. I'm not anyone's project. I know what I deserve, and I'm sticking to that. The scars Lisa and Zach left are still there, but they don't control me anymore. They're just reminders of how far I've come and what I've survived. But I have to ask, am I being too harsh? Did I go too far by cutting people off like this? Or is it fair to set such firm boundaries? What would you all do?